At a bustling police station, amidst the ringing phones and whispered mockery, an 8-year-old boy sat silently, his small hands tightly clutching the metal dog tag, the last memento of a father he would never see again. "Your dad was a hero, wasn't he?" A police officer sneered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The crowd around him burst into laughter, dismissing the boy as nothing more than a dreamer with far-fetched tales. But what would happen when the door swung open and a colonel, adorned with shining medals, walked in, heading straight for that boy? In that defining moment, the truth buried beneath ridicule would explode, shaking the entire room and forcing every eye to lower. This is the story of Ethan Carter, a child with an unyielding heart, who turned doubt into respect and proved that the legacy of a hero can silence the world. Subscribe now so you won't miss out on these inspiring stories of courage. In the cold light of the downtown police station, the flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows on the rigid floor. Caleb Thompson, an 8-year-old boy with bright eyes, sat quietly on an old wooden bench, his small hands gripping the shiny metal dog tag around his neck. It was the only keepsake he had left of his father, Sergeant Nathan Thompson, who had sacrificed his life when Caleb was only 6 years old. The engraved letters on the tag, Sergeant Nathan Thompson, seemed to anchor him to memories of a father he had never had the chance to grow up with. He couldn't let those memories fade. His mother, Laura, stood at the front desk, her voice choking as she recounted the robbery at their home. "They took the TV, the computer. Luckily, Caleb was still at school," she managed to say, but her anxious eyes could not hide the fear that lingered in her heart. Yet she still tried to maintain composure for her son. Caleb, seemingly oblivious, was fixated on the dog tag, his finger slowly tracing the engraved lines, as if each mark held a story only he understood. He was searching for a connection to the father he had lost, in every character on the tag. Officer James Carter, a seasoned cop with short-cropped hair and 20 years of experience, leaned against the desk, his eyes studying the boy. He had witnessed countless difficult situations, but there was something about Caleb's story that caught his attention. He spoke up, asking with curiosity, "Hey, kid, what's got you so focused?" Caleb looked up, his gaze surprisingly firm. Those eyes, deep and filled with determination, seemed as though he had lived more than his years. He answered in a quiet but steady voice, without hesitation, "This is my dad's tag. He was a soldier, a hero." His words were a firm statement, though to those around him it might have seemed like an incomplete story, not yet heavy enough to be taken seriously. Officer Carter gave a slight smirk, turning to glance at the receptionist with a mocking smile. He meant no offense to the boy, but perhaps he was just too accustomed to hearing such stories about soldiers that no one remembered. "A hero, huh?" Carter repeated, his tone half mocking, half critical. "Kid, I've heard these stories all day long." Laughter rippled from the other officers in the room, their eyes filled with skepticism, as if Caleb were simply part of a joke they were trying to hide. Caleb remained unshaken. He wasn't angry, nor was he sad. Instead, he held his gaze, steadfast and strong. He understood that those around him might not see the value of his father, but he knew one thing for sure. His father was a hero. Every engraved line on the dog tag was a part of his father's story, a story of sacrifice, love, and courage, something that only those who truly valued it could understand. Even if the adults around him laughed or failed to understand, Caleb kept his faith. He lifted his head high, feeling the strength from the dog tag, from the memory of the great father he loved. In a world full of doubt and injustice, this 8-year-old boy was proof of the power of loyalty, perseverance, and belief in values that can never be erased. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. To Caleb, his father would always be a hero, and always would be. Carter didn't stop. He bent down, the mocking smile still on his lips, his eyes full of derision as he looked at Caleb. "So what did your dad do, kid? What rank was he? Or is this just some bedtime story you've been told?" He deliberately emphasized each word, as though what Caleb said was nothing more than an imaginary tale the boy was repeating. The room erupted with laughter, mocking, making the atmosphere even heavier. Caleb's words were dismissed as childish, not worth considering. Caleb remained undeterred. The boy lifted his head high, his gaze unwavering, the faint light from the fluorescent lamps reflecting on his face still full of youth. "Sergeant Nathan Thompson. He saved people," Caleb said, his voice steady but filled with strength. Each word he spoke landed like a hammer in the silence, firm and clear. He knew he didn't need to explain further. He only had to speak the truth. Carter burst into loud laughter. "Oh, saved people, huh? Must be a superhero from one of those movies you watch. A great sergeant, leaving his son a piece of old metal." Carter's words were laced with mockery, and those around him continued laughing, their laughter cutting through Caleb like a dagger. The boy sat still, clutching the metal tag around his neck as though it were a shield protecting him from their taunts. The pain, though not visible on his face, was clearly creeping through every corner of his soul. Laura, Caleb's mother, couldn't stand it any longer. She turned around, her face flushed with anger and pain. Her eyes welled up with tears, not from weakness, but from the agony of watching her husband's memory be tarnished right in front of their son. As a widow, Laura had lived with that loss, but now she had to witness part of her husband being insulted in a place she thought would protect her child. "Caleb, come here, honey," she called, her voice choked with emotion. She didn't want her son to endure it any longer. Caleb stood up, his shoulders straight, and walked over to his mother. Though he didn't say a word, he had already decided that he wouldn't let their words shake his belief in his father. The metal tag still sat firmly in his hand, like an invisible shield protecting him from the harshness of the world. He didn't look back at Carter or anyone in the room, even though their laughter still echoed in the air. The room grew silent, but the wound in Caleb's heart had already been carved deep. Laura embraced her son, her eyes downcast, unwilling to let anyone see her pain. The mocking words, though now silent, still lingered like a wound. Carter returned to the pile of paperwork on his desk, a brief flash of regret crossing his face. But that regret wasn't enough to make him apologize. He continued his work, as though what had just happened was nothing more than a trivial incident of the day. Caleb sat down next to his mother, his eyes lowered, not looking at anyone, not speaking. But in the corner of the room, an older security guard, with calloused hands and a limping gait, had stopped. His sharp gaze lingered on Caleb, as if he had just realized something important he couldn't ignore. He watched the boy a little longer, as though in his eyes lay memories and understanding that only those who have suffered pain could truly feel. The gatekeeper was not just an ordinary janitor. Henry Brooks, a man bearing the scars of war, had once been a military medic with 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. After returning home, burdened with the haunting memories of the battlefield, he chose the quiet work at the police station as a way to find peace, a place where there were no gunshots and no haunting images. Yet, His sharp eyes had never lost their ability to observe, to recognize the small but important details, even if they were just a subtle gesture or a casual word. When the name Nathan Thompson was spoken amid the mocking words, a memory suddenly ignited in Henry's mind. That name, though long unheard, was an inseparable part of his own life of sacrifice. Henry didn't need to hear more. Those taunts to him were no different than a blow to the pride of those who had fought, those who had fallen without recognition. Without a word, Henry stepped into the hallway, his hands accustomed to gripping things tightly in tense situations. He pulled out his old flip phone, a model that most had long since forgotten, but for him, it still held a special power. He dialed from memory, his voice low but filled with resolve, like a soldier ready for battle. "Sir, this is Brooks. I'm at police station number 5. There's something you need to know immediately." Inside, Laura was finishing the report, her hands trembling as she wrote on the paperwork, her eyes never leaving Caleb, keeping him close. She could feel the pain in her heart as she faced people who didn't understand and didn't respect the husband she had lost. The officer on duty explained the investigation process, but his words seemed to echo from a distant place, unable to penetrate Laura's mind at that moment. She didn't care much for what he was saying. The only thing that mattered to her was how to get Caleb out of there, away from the cold stares and mocking words. Officer Carter had moved on to another case, seemingly forgetting the boy and the dog tag. His mockery of Nathan Thompson still lingered in the air, but now no one seemed to care about it anymore. Laura stood up, took a copy of the report from the officer, and held Caleb's hand. "Let's go, honey," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Their steps were light, as if they wanted to leave quickly, away from this place. But before they could leave, the door to the police station swung open with force, cutting through the noise in the room. A man walked in, his uniform impeccably neat, medals gleaming on his chest, the eagle insignia on his shoulders shining brightly, reflecting the light from the room's lamps. Colonel Robert Mitchell, a symbol of the military, entered with a dignified presence, his sharp gaze sweeping the room, and everyone in the room paused for a moment, as if he carried an undeniable power. All eyes turned toward him, and in that moment, the atmosphere in the room seemed to settle. Colonel Mitchell didn't need to say anything more. Just one look from him was enough to change the entire space. He walked forward, his gaze fixed solely on Laura and Caleb. It seemed as though he already knew what was going on, but instead of offering an explanation, he simply looked at them with deep understanding. There were no awkward words or meaningless questions. He knew everything that needed to be known, and his presence was a confirmation that people like Nathan Thompson, despite their sacrifice, would never be forgotten. The mocking words Caleb had endured earlier now seemed to be swallowed by Colonel Mitchell's presence. He didn't need to say anything to change the situation. His presence alone was enough to bring a measure of justice that Caleb and his mother deserved. Under his gaze, those in the room could feel the power of respect and gratitude for those who had fought for freedom. The room suddenly fell into absolute silence. The sound of a ringing phone, the scratch of a pen on paper, all of it stopped. Every eye turned toward Colonel Mitchell, who had just walked in like a powerful wave, making the air in the room heavier. His gaze swept over every corner of the room, passing quickly over the officers and civilians, never stopping on anyone. When his eyes locked onto Caleb, the silence deepened, as if time had come to a halt. Colonel Mitchell didn't need another word. He walked straight toward the boy, each step echoing in the empty room, the sound of his shoes like the beat of a war drum, strong and commanding. As he reached Caleb, stopping just 3 paces away, he stood tall, his posture filled with authority. There was no softness, no hesitation. He raised his hand and performed a perfect military salute, meant for an 8-year-old boy, an action that seemed only fitting for seasoned soldiers. But today, it was for Caleb, the son of a hero. "Young man," his voice rang out, strong like thunder. "Sergeant Nathan Thompson was my mentor, my commander, and my hero." Colonel Mitchell's words were a firm declaration, not just for Caleb, but for everyone present. His words echoed, not only as respect for the boy's father, but also as a recognition of the sacrifices and efforts Nathan Thompson had made. Caleb stood up, his small hands still gripping the metal dog tag around his neck. His eyes shone with amazement, but also with pride. The boy realized that the father he had always been proud of and missed, the one whom everyone around him might have looked down on, was now recognized and respected by someone like Colonel Mitchell. Laura stood by, her hand instinctively covering her mouth as tears began to fall down her cheek. These were the tears of a mother, full of pride but also deep pain, as she witnessed the sacrifice of the husband she had always loved and remembered. Officer Carter, who had previously mocked Caleb and his father, now froze at his desk. His hand held a pen, but he dared not look up, unable to face what was unfolding. The whole room seemed to fall into a different space, where mockery and disdain had no place. Colonel Mitchell turned, his sharp gaze sliding past Carter like a silent reprimand, but heavy and deep. He didn't need a word, but his presence was enough to make Carter feel small and unworthy. Colonel Mitchell extended his hand, shaking Caleb's hand firmly and formally, as if to pass some invisible strength to the boy. "Your father saved my life, son," he said, his voice still resonating, but warm and sincere. "At Fort Campbell, at the Pentagon, and across 3 continents, the name Nathan Thompson made everyone stand taller, their chests puffed out." His words were not just a thank you to Nathan Thompson, but a declaration of the profound impact the father had on the lives of those who had fought alongside him. Colonel Mitchell's words rang out like a strong statement, making the room fall into silent admiration. He turned, his eyes sweeping across Carter once more, but this time there was no mockery or derision, only silent criticism, as heavy as a hammer strike. Carter couldn't avoid that gaze. He had nothing left to say, only silence, and in that silence he knew he was wrong, that the mocking words from before could never erase the greatness of Nathan Thompson. 5. The entire room fell into absolute silence, as Colonel Mitchell, who everyone had always seen as a symbol of strength and authority, kneeled before Caleb. That gesture, filled with respect and surprise, made the air in the room tense. All eyes were on him, surprise and admiration silently appearing on the faces around. Colonel Mitchell was not only a seasoned soldier, but the leader of many campaigns, a man admired by thousands. Yet in this moment, he kneeled before an 8-year-old boy, and that act seemed to erase all the glory he had ever carried. He slowly pulled a folded photograph from his pocket, its edges worn from time, but its value had not faded. Colonel Mitchell carefully placed the photo on the wooden bench, as though holding a priceless treasure. "Special Training Battalion, Fort Campbell, 2016, he said, his deep voice resonating in the air. The photo showed a group of 30 soldiers standing in line, all with stern faces, displaying the discipline and order of soldiers. But the most remarkable part of the photo was in the center, where a man stood with 3 stripes on his sleeve, Sergeant Nathan Thompson. His face in the photo was strikingly similar to Caleb's. Every feature, every posture, every glance seemed to reflect the boy sitting in front of him. Caleb, his eyes wide, slowly reached out to touch the photo. His fingers trembled, as if he wanted to feel the presence of the father he had never met. "That's my dad," he whispered, his voice choked, as if a long-lost memory had suddenly resurfaced within him. Those words were a firm declaration, needing no further explanation. In Caleb's gaze, the father he had only known through stories, through memories lost in his mother's heart, now came to life again through this photo. "Yes," Colonel Mitchell affirmed, his voice deep, filled with profound respect. "This man carried me half a mile across the training field after an explosion that should have taken both our lives. He refused to be evacuated until every trainee was safe." Colonel Mitchell's words were a living testament to Nathan Thompson's sacrifice. Soldiers didn't just fight for their country. They fought for their comrades, for those standing beside them. His story of Nathan wasn't just a tribute. It was a story of courage, perseverance, and values that few could truly understand. Mitchell stood up, his gaze no longer fixed on Caleb, but sweeping over everyone in the room. His voice rang out strong, like an order that could not be denied. "Sergeant Thompson trained warriors who now wear stars on their shoulders. General Davidson at Central Command, Colonel Ramirez at the 101st Airborne Division. They were all his students." His words were like a mental shock, altering the atmosphere in the room. The names he mentioned were no ordinary names. General Davidson, Colonel Ramirez, they were leaders, legends in the military, and all of them had been trained under Nathan Thompson. The room remained dead silent. No one spoke a word. No one dared to even breathe loudly. Eyes began to meet with respect, a newfound awareness of the greatness of the father they had never understood before. Officer Carter, who had previously mocked Caleb and his father, now shrunk back in his chair. His hand still held a pen, but he dared not look up, unable to face what was unfolding. The confidence he once had dissolved like morning mist under the strong gaze of Colonel Mitchell. Carter could not fight against that look, could no longer justify his words. Colonel Mitchell didn't need to say anything more. He had done everything necessary with just his actions. His words had deeply etched into the hearts of all those present, not only as a respect for Nathan Thompson, but as a recognition of the sacrifices this father had made for both his country and the soldiers under his command. The mocking words from before were now meaningless, and no one dared to laugh at the name Nathan Thompson ever again. The door to the police station opened again, bringing a wave of fresh air. Captain David Reynolds, the police chief, stepped in with a stern expression, his eyes fixed on Caleb. He had been watching from the office, and now his presence felt like an inevitability. There were no usual greetings, only respect and determination in his gaze. "I've been watching from the office," he said, his voice deep and weighty. Moving toward Caleb, Captain Reynolds stopped in front of the boy, the silence in the air making each of his steps feel like an indelible mark. He extended his hand, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. "Caleb, I'm Captain Reynolds. I would be honored if one day you came to our academy to teach them about perseverance and respect, the same things your father taught Colonel Mitchell." His words were not only a show of respect for Caleb, but also a recognition of the values Nathan Thompson had passed down. Caleb looked at his hand, then resolutely took it. His gaze remained steadfast, as if his father were still standing beside him, watching over him and affirming his worth. He didn't need to say anything more. The strong handshake was enough to respond. Captain Reynolds turned to Carter, who stood nearby, still tense from what had just occurred. "Officer, come to my office. Now," he ordered. Carter said nothing, only silently obeyed, his face pale, as though the captain's words had severed all of his freedom. Though no one spoke, everyone in the room understood that the consequences for Carter's actions had come. After Carter left, Captain Reynolds bent down, his gaze still on Caleb. Your father's record says it all. 22 years of service, the Bronze Star with Valor device, the Distinguished Service Medal. But what speaks even more is how you stand today. His words were a tribute, not just to Nathan Thompson's past, but to Caleb's future, and how this young boy was following in his father's footsteps, unyielding in the face of hardship and pain. Laura, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice choked but full of pride. Nathan is always with us, Captain. Caleb hears his voice every day. Her words echoed as a confirmation that, although Nathan was gone, his presence would forever live in the family and those around him. Colonel Mitchell, standing nearby, nodded in agreement, his gaze full of understanding. Great leaders never leave. Their example is an order forever. His words were a reminder that men like Nathan Thompson didn't just exist in the past. They were beacons that illuminated the path for those who followed. A week later, the police station issued an official apology to the Thompson family, showing a shift in attitude and respect for the one who had sacrificed so much. Carter, after his thoughtless actions, was reassigned to community service. His first task was to organize a memorial service for the fallen soldiers. A photograph of Sergeant Nathan Thompson was prominently displayed in the station lobby, with the inscription below, "He taught warriors how to lead, and leaders how to serve." This was not just a tribute to Nathan, but a powerful message about the value of sacrifice, loyalty, and responsibility. Caleb, still wearing his father's dog tag, had become a symbol of courage. The boy didn't just wear a keepsake, he carried a great legacy, the legacy of a father that no one could forget. Colonel Mitchell often visited the Thompson family, bringing stories of Nathan. These stories not only warmed Laura's heart, but also made her laugh and cry. Laugh from pride, cry from missing the wonderful husband and father she had lost. Every year, on Veterans Day, an empty chair was placed at the police station. On that chair hung a dog tag engraved with the words, "For those who silently teach us how to stand firm." This was a reminder to everyone that the sacrifices of soldiers would never be forgotten, and that resilience was not only measured by victories, but also by the lessons they left behind for the next generation. Caleb, now older, still wore his father's original dog tag. To him, it was not just a keepsake, but a powerful reminder that his father's legacy, no matter how many years passed, was stronger than any doubt. The boy who once sat quietly was now a young man with resilience, carrying not only the strength of the dog tag, but also the shining example his father left behind, a beacon of courage, determination, and absolute loyalty. The story of Caleb and Sergeant Nathan Thompson is a testament that courage and respect can change an entire community. If you're moved by this journey, hit like to spread the message about these silent heroes. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed a moment that made an entire room fall into respectful silence? Don't forget to share this video to honor veterans and their families. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any video. Together, we keep the legacy of these heroes alive in everyone's hearts.